Hello everyone, spring is here. That's the good news. Unfortunately, it's snowing here in Poughkeepsie this morning. I hope you all are staying safe. Dr. Laura and I went for a walk on the rail trail Friday and it was mobbed. So much for social distancing. I think people believe it's okay if you are outdoors. Not. I enjoyed very much meeting with all those who attended my Wednesday Zoom meeting. Several of you wrote me to say that other courses were meeting online at the same time. That's okay. The meeting was informational and an informal check-in to see how everyone was doing in the midst of the coronavirus crisis. Okay, some Module 6 and 7 housekeeping. Several of you did not realize that you were supposed to take and repost the test with answers of your classmates and then just give feedback. Some of you just gave feedback rather than giving feedback and, capital A-N-D, posting your test with answers. It's important for each of you to examine how your questions are functioning, just as Tosh mentioned about pilot testing. Each year you look at how your questions are working, you keep some, you tweak others, and throw out the bad ones. I'm going to close the Hard as the Dickens discussion board tomorrow, so you still have a little time to make your 6 posts on 3 days. It always makes me a little sad to see this one go, because this gets my students to really examine the pros and cons of large-scale tests, test prep, and the concepts of reliability, validity, and fairness. It also ferrets out the differences between norm and criterion reference tests, although we didn't talk about that a lot, but I did mention it in my presentation. Many people rail against norm reference tests, like the SAT and the GRE, and in most cases rightfully so. They are created to sort and separate, to make that bell curve, much like the original IQ tests. These people went into the Army, these people went to college, and these people went to the factory. People that use them, like college admissions officers, want to be able to distinguish between test takers to make their selection process easier. So I hope I've had admissions people in my course before, and that riled them up a little, but I don't think I have any admissions people in my course this time. The good news is that many colleges are making these tests optional. They're also, I shared an article in one section about gradeless, going gradeless. More teachers are going gradeless. I also posted it on my Edutopia site. And so some colleges are even accepting alternatives to grades, which is also good news, but it makes their job harder. After the current admissions scandal and celebrities going to jail, maybe everyone will jettison the tests. Our state assessments, on the other hand, are criterion referenced and based on the standards. Theoretically, everyone could get all the questions correct. They are not made to create a spread only to distinguish between those who know the material well and those who don't. The controversy is regarding how the state creates the cut points for each level, which is done after the test results are compiled, and in a way is almost like creating a bell curve again. A few of you commented that teacher-made tests are better than large-scale tests because teachers can design their tests based on their students' abilities and learning styles. I believe this is a major misconception, because if you start changing your tests based on the way you quote-unquote think your students know or will be doing, you will be doing them a disservice, and they will never be able to answer one of the 3 big questions. Where am I going? Where am I now? And how can I close the gap? You can always accommodate learning styles by allowing students to take the exam in different areas. For example, low light, standing up, seated on an exercise ball, etc. I shared an article in a couple of sections on vocabulary acquisition written by Dr. Laura that gives you an idea how we can accommodate learning style preferences in the teaching and learning process, which is much more important than determining or accommodating learning styles in the testing process, although that can be done as well. Several of you mentioned what I considered another misconception held by teachers of students from poverty or students who are learning disabled. Because of these conditions, you felt that the state tests are biased against these students. First, there are hundreds of schools in the country where most students are receiving free lunch that are also high poverty, high achieving schools. Second, we grant learning disability students accommodations to level the playing field. There are only two types of bias, as we discovered. Offensiveness, has to offend by your subgroup, and unfair penalization by your subgroup. A few of you reacted to the opt-out movement. I'm sharing an article from the Washington Post warning us about the new company, Questar, although they've been creating our grade 3 through 8 tests now for 3 or 4 years. In that same article, the author mentions that one of the steps the state has taken to appease the parents is that tests are no longer timed, which, according to the article, no longer makes the test standardized. I disagree. We make accommodations all the time for special needs students to level the playing field. I am at a loss to understand how allowing students to complete an exam and therefore get a complete assessment of what they know, understand, or can do affects the standardization and how we can use those results. Several of you also mentioned how teachers should become involved in creating our state assessments now that Pearson is out of the picture in our grades 3 through 8 tests. Questar, in partnership with State Ed, are soliciting teachers to become involved in all aspects of the test creation process, including item rating. So those of you who felt teachers should be more involved got your wish. While some of you felt teachers had enough on their plate, teachers are the ultimate curriculum experts who can learn the intricacies of writing test items that are able to be consistent, assess the standards, and be absent of bias. I shared an interview article whose author quoted Doug Reeves regarding the length of our state assessments and that they are more of a test of stamina than content knowledge. In one of my sections, the candidate shared an article on making tests fair, which mentions an alternative to paper-based tests toward the end. Computer adaptive testing, where time is not spent testing students on items that they do not know. So it takes less time and does not leave students feeling like they failed because there were so many questions they couldn't answer. It would be great for progress monitoring as well because the questions can be changed without changing reliability, validity, and fairness. A few of you interacted with the article I shared on Wiggins, why we should stop bashing state tests. I tried to stimulate a reaction by saying that Wiggins blamed teachers for not designing higher order thinking questions. My wife, who is a school administrator, often sees her teachers struggle with asking higher order questions in the classroom. I think Wiggins touched a nerve or a few egos. Several of you took offense that teachers might be part of the problem because they don't know how to create tests that require students to make inferences. In my responses, I predicted that many of you will struggle with that very issue in making your own selected response tests. I'm hoping you'll make my prediction wrong, but so far, you've struggled. Test prep is also part of this discussion, so many different topics. It's important that you read and become familiar with Popham's Chapter 14, which is part of your assigned readings. As I mentioned in my test prep video, a teacher in the Albany area was fired for using a copy of a pilot test to prepare her students. That's a very big mistake. All copies of pilot tests are supposed to be returned to the state. This teacher obviously felt those instructions were not meant for her, or she did not read the instructions. That does not mean we should not be teaching to the standards represented by the items on our state assessments. That's one of Popham's 2 definitions of teaching to the test. 2 years ago, my stepdaughter was placed on an improvement plan based on her test scores alone. A first-year teacher. She began incorporating more test-like assessments into her unit plans. Her results improved significantly. So I would encourage this approach for every teacher. The bottom line is that our students are prepared. If our students are prepared, they will be confident which in turn alleviates stress. There are also a myriad of pressure-reducing strategies like meditation, breathing, yoga, and other activities we can do to make things much less anxiety-producing. Whether you work in a school that does test prep inappropriately or appropriately, you now know what you should be doing, and there are always acceptable ways to prepare your students for the state assessments. This topic is so important because many veteran and new teachers are not aware of the educational defensibility principle, or that there are easy ways to relieve test anxiety. The biggest thing, in my opinion, is your attitude about the tests themselves. If you believe strongly that these tests are wrong, biased, don't assess accurately, or otherwise should not be used, you need to be extremely careful not to pass this along to your students. I liken it to elementary teachers who dislike math and pass that dislike on to their students. Unethical, to say the least. Unfortunately, this is often done unconsciously, so be aware of your attitude. I hope you found this discussion board worthwhile. I certainly felt it was, and I will talk to you again in 1 week.